why don't we do this? Why don't we have everybody introduce yourself for the camera, remembering that most people won't know who you are, even though you're a legend in your own household. And just give us a brief bio, focus on your legal experience, why you want the job, and then we'll jump into some questions. Since you're all lawyers and argumentative by nature, I'll encourage you to interact with your colleagues. Please do so respectfully, civilly. Don't speak over somebody else, but if people say things you want to follow up on or disagree with, please do so. So let's get started at this end of the table. Please introduce yourself and go through the spiel.
Cool. I'm Tom Dwyer. I'm the minor felony attorney manager at Multnomah Defenders, which is the second largest public defense agency in the county. I think it's the second largest in the state, but certainly the second largest in Multnomah County. I've only worked as a lawyer at Multnomah Defenders. It was the first job I had after law school, and I've worked there since 2019. I want the job because I think I would be good at it, because I am fair-minded and compassionate.
So you're a public defender?
I am, yeah.
And are you managing, or are you actually practicing law? Or?
Both. I manage attorneys and I have my own.
And where did you go to law school?
I went to the University of Notre Dame Law School. The University of Notre Dame Law School.
Gotcha. Where are you from?
I'm from St. Louis, Missouri.
And what brought you out here?
My wife got a job out here.
Gotcha.
My now wife.
Thank you.
Great.
I'm John Schlosser. Let's see, I am currently a consortium contract public defense attorney. Let's see, I grew up in North Dakota on a farm. Went to college, became a marine biologist. Then I ended up in Oregon and working as a technician and a manager for work and pest control for a while. I went to Lewis and Clark Law School.
When did you graduate?
2010. So I've been doing this about 14 years.
And again, you're a public defender?
Yes.
I don't know.
It's
a consortium. What does that mean?
Criminal Defense Consortium, so I have a contract with the state too.
You don't work for like the public defenders. You work privately, but you have a contract to provide
Correct.
public defense.
Yep.
What kind of work?
All
Criminal?
levels, yeah, all criminal.
All in Multnomah County?
Everything up to murder. So I can handle everything up to murder
Okay.
in Columbia County.
And why are you running?
We need good judges. I don't hear enough advocacy from a lot of the judges about pushing for more ways to reduce recidivism, reduce repeat offenders. I really want to help expand restorative justice in the county and across the state to help heal communities affected with crime and victims as well.
You ran previously for a judge?
Yes.
What year?
2020, right during COVID.
And what have you done to improve your chances since then?
Work.
Are you pro tem or doing anything like that? Okay. Okay. And don't you do some civil work as well?
So the first couple of years I practiced, I was at a general practice law firm, so I did civil practice, family law, criminal defense as well, but a little of everything. Lately, I've moved out of doing most everything except for criminal defense and a little civil rights litigation.
Okay, great. Jen?
Hello, my name is Jennifer Myrick. I am 41. I live in Northeast. Grew up in Southeast, so I crossed Burnside recently. And I studied pretty much my entire life knowing that I would be sitting here. For undergraduate and post-bac, I studied the economic disparities and monopolization of power within Multnomah County, looking for solutions as well as some answers as to how we got to where we are, and the challenges faced within each community. I have been an attorney. I graduated in 2015 from Lewis and Clark. I worked at the Multnomah County District Attorney's Office.
For how long?
1 year as just doing misdemeanors. And then after graduation, I went to go work at the U.S. Attorney's Office where I was a specialist and I assisted in the prosecution of violent crimes. After Trump was elected, I decided I would rather represent undocumented immigrants.
So I'm sorry, were you hired by Billy Williams or were you before Billy Williams?
I was with Billy Williams. I was there for the Malheur trial. I also worked with Leah Bolstad on major sex trafficking prosecution.
Okay, and then-
How long at the U.S. Attorney's Office?
I was there from 2015 to 2017, beginning.
and you said you left when Trump got elected?
Yeah, there was a mass exodus, to be honest, but I left in the May, right before his picture got hung up in the office.
And where did you go?
I went to go work at a law firm specializing in Spanish-speaking undocumented immigrants, and I represented individuals within the criminal justice system in both criminal law and civil law. And then I decided to strike out on my own, and now I'm a public defense provider. I mainly take cases in Columbia County, similar to John. I do everything from misdemeanors to Measure 11s and major felonies, and then I also do pro tem work at Tigard Municipal Court. And this is my first time running for judge. I'm really focused. I think that I would be a great judge because I'm focused on the court being a more efficient access point for social services. For decades, we've had cuts to our social services in terms of mental health, addiction, as well as housing. I have the endorsements of industry professionals and experts focused on addiction and mental health as well as local housing advocates. So I hope to bridge the gap so that we can, instead of directing individuals in need down the road or to another building or to add to a wait list, we could actually link those individuals with providers more effectively at the courthouse. I also want to have a cultural shift towards how we treat and respect public defense providers to attract more to the profession, as well as retain those we have.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Rachel Phillips. I grew up not ever wanting to be a lawyer, and my career actually started in the arts. I went to New Orleans Center for Creative Arts in New Orleans. I was born and raised in New Orleans. Have a theater background, worked at a professional theater company in New Mexico, worked at the Santa Fe, New Mexico Repertory Theater. We were based in Santa Fe, but we would do 2 weeks in Santa Fe and then 2 weeks in Albuquerque. And the last year that I worked there, no one wanted to be the last person to the bank to cash their paycheck, because if you were the last person to the bank, that check might bounce. So one of the drawbacks from working in the arts. So I did that, and then I was in LA waiting tables and trying to get cast in things, and then my mom got cancer. And it sucked, and I took a family leave from the restaurant. I worked at Wolfgang Puck Cafe at Universal City Walk, and I took family leave for 3 months and went back home to take care of her. She had to have emergency surgery. It was pretty progressed. Luckily, she got well enough to eventually go back to work. I went back to LA, and she passed within like 18 months of diagnosis. And after she passed, my older sisters, for whatever reason, the only property we had was the family house. Like, that's it. I grew up poor. I didn't even get to go to my first, second, or third choice college. I had to go to my fourth choice with scholarships. Worked all through undergrad to get by. And so when she passed, my older siblings challenged the will. And this is New Orleans. Napoleonic Code is the law that they go by. And it took us 3 years in civil court in New Orleans to hash out the house. To basically
When you say they challenged the will, they're basically trying to screw you out of your share, or what?
It was my grandfather's house. We moved in after my grandfather died when I was 3 months old. And there's a lot of history in the house. And my dad wound up having to pay a mortgage on it, even though he didn't take the money out. It got complicated. One of his older brothers had messed around with stuff. And so we grew up with my grandmother in the house. They literally just said, something along the lines to my brother of, because he wanted to buy it, and I was happy to like go in with him and then let him buy me out. Like we would buy them out and then he could buy me out, but to keep it in the family because it had been my grandfather's. And their message was sort of like, we will sell the house to anyone but you, meaning my brother. And what happened was, and there was a will, my mother wrote a will that everything was to be divided between the four of us equally. And Louisiana being Louisiana, the judge that was overseeing it said, and my brother and one sister were named as co-executors. But so the judge hearing it said, I'm going to keep this simple and I'm going to appoint my best friend to be the executor and we'll take care of this really fast. And it dragged on for 3 years. So
that drove you to law school.
That did. It was obviously devastating to have that sort of family division because I thought we had a really nice family. So that was not fun. But it was a miserable experience in terms of I had legal representation. I'm still friends with my lawyer from that back in New Orleans. But it was overwhelming. And I felt so overwhelmed and so alone. And I decided to go to law school because I didn't want anybody else to feel that way.
When did you go to law school?
So we settled everything we didn't settle everything until 2002. I got accepted at Lewis and Clark in 2001, but had to delay until we settled everything so I could afford to move out here. And I had gotten a partial scholarship. So I moved out here, worked all 3 years of law school to get through, and basically criminal law was what made the most sense. And I was on the school's moot court mock trial team. I was on the school's international law moot court team, and then was on the moot court honor board when I was there, and just like got everything out of the experience I could.
So what have you been doing since?
Since then, I got hired shortly after I graduated in 2005. And while I was in law school, I worked for an attorney and was a certified law student. So I worked for Alex Amalian, and so was trying cases as a law student in criminal law. And that's when I found I really, really liked it and seemed to have a knack for it. So then I got hired at Metropolitan Public Defender in 2006 and was there for a little over 8 years, 8.5 years, and tried everything from misdemeanors up to Measure 11s. I'm a murder qualified attorney. I've done a number of murder cases since. And I left after 8.5 years because a public defense caseload is a really exhausting caseload. It is absolutely an incredibly difficult caseload to manage, and you can work, especially if you go to trial a lot, you can have 60 to 80 hour work weeks. Sometimes it can get to the point where it's just not sustainable. So I left in 2014, and I'm in private practice. I also did some investigation just to take a break from trials, and I worked with Lisa Maxfield, who is nationally recognized as just an incredible criminal defense attorney. And I worked with her on the Malheur trial, actually. Our team was the team that found John Kilman, who was pivotal to the defense's case. And he was the undercover informant for the government, for the federal government, that sort of helped us secure those not guilty verdicts. And working with her for 3 years as an investigator and not as a second chair, it gives you a certain remove because you're not taking on the responsibilities of an attorney. You're more talking to witnesses, you're doing interviews, you're doing investigation, and I could sit back and watch her at work. And she is intense, she is really, really smart, and it really upped my game as a trial attorney. And then I started taking cases again after that, and I actually had a string of successes after working with her that I attribute to working with her.
I'm sorry, we need to speed this up.
Oh, sorry.
For the last few years, you've been working on your own?
Yes, I work on my own. I take some court-appointed cases, but I don't take very many anymore because of my frustration with public defense. I was one of the first people that spoke out about the pay disparity and the gender discrimination.
So are you doing other than public defense work?
Yeah, I do private retained cases. And I do a lot of victim representation, and my practice in the past 2 to 3 years has shifted to a lot more victim representation.
So tell us quickly why you're running and why you think you're qualified.
Absolutely. We have over 5,000 unrepresented people across the entire state of Oregon. The system's not working. It is just not working. And I am someone who has never had a problem speaking out even when it's uncomfortable and even when it's hard. Mm-hmm. I've had a lot of backlash the past 3 years for speaking up about the problems in public defense. And I would model my work after Judge McShane, who is the judge from the 4th District. He was a Multnomah County Circuit Court judge. He started at Metropolitan Public Defender, where I started. He is the judge that issued the opinion in Betchart, which says the state cannot hold people past 7 days if they do not have an attorney, with the exception, obviously, of murder cases and certain violent crimes. And he followed the Constitution. And the judges across the state could have been doing that for for at least a year before he made that decision. The Constitution didn't change. And so I want to be the judge that does the things that are hard, even if it's not the status quo. We need somebody to come in and help fix this.
What's the hard thing that you're willing to do?
Follow the Constitution. I mean, I sat in on a motion hearing on a murder case last week.
But you've just said you're running because of the crisis
in public defense.
And
but it affects all of us.
Oh wait, the crisis is largely that there aren't enough public defenders, right? So how does your being a judge help that? I'm a little bit puzzled.
We could end the entire crisis in public defense in roughly 6 months if prosecutors made better case resolution offers on the cases. Because the faster you close cases, the quicker it frees up public defenders to take on more cases. Mm-hmm. That's the thing. And holding people to deadlines, I can't tell you how many times prosecutors are given set-overs day of trial. That would never happen for a defense attorney. Okay. And it used to be when Judge McShane was in Multnomah County, if the prosecutors didn't have their witnesses, we're proceeding anyway. And if you can't proceed, the case is dismissed. Okay. So to hold everybody to the same standard, which has fallen away.
Thank you.
My name is Jeff Oxier. I grew up in Oregon, born in Alaska, but went to grade school here and high school here. Went to law school specifically to prosecute domestic violence cases. I was really interested in doing that work specifically. Have kind of focused my entire career on doing that work. I graduated from law school in '06, worked in the Marion County Domestic Violence Unit. I was in Multnomah County where I worked in several different units. Then I was the elected DA in Columbia County. And now I supervise the domestic violence unit in the Multnomah DA's office. Why I'm running for judge and why...
So you're currently in the Multnomah County DA's office?
Yes, I am, yes.
Before that, you were the district attorney in Columbia?
Yeah, so
I should know this, but you don't have to live in the county in which you serve as district attorney?
I'll give you the whole story here. Yeah, so in '08, I came to the Multnomah County DA's office, and I worked for a little under 10 years in the Multnomah County DA's office. During a part of that, I had moved with my family out onto we wanted to be homesteaders, so we moved out onto...
Sorry, when you were at the county DA?
When I was still at Multnomah County.
Were you civil or criminal?
Criminal.
Okay.
Yep. Worked as a...
Was that Frank you were reporting to?
It was, for part of it, was Frank, and DA Underhill,
Gotcha.
and at the time I was living, for a period I lived in outside of Scappoose on property and with my young boys and my wife, and I was commuting to downtown Portland. Some defense attorneys actually encouraged me to put in to be the Columbia County DA. I did that for 6 years, but I came back to the Multnomah County DA's office in July of 2023, and I moved back to Portland.
Are those 4-year terms you run for to be Columbia County DA?
Correct.
So did you leave mid-term?
Yes, I did.
They had to have a special election to fill your seat?
No.
You know something that you want to share?
Oh yeah, it was quite a mess. He left without someone to take his position, and we didn't have a DA. It was pretty bad. We were short-staffed. A lot of the office left when Mr. Oxier was in, so we lost a lot of institutional knowledge. We had to have an interim prosecutor from the DOJ while the governor was able to sort out who would take over that position. The governor, after months, was appointed Joshua Pond, but our entire county was in complete disarray because he left abruptly.
Okay.
And it was after the legislation passed where you get a better pension as a DA, which you're not eligible for when you're an elected DA.
Please respond if you like.
Yeah, so I came back to Multnomah County for a whole host of reasons. The primary one is I love the Multnomah County courthouse. It really is true. And we miss Portland. My wife grew up in Southeast Portland, close in. That's where we lived before we had our homesteading dream that we wanted to try. We lived out there for 10 years, but we were really ready to come back. Something, not only did I really miss Portland and miss the Multnomah County Courthouse, but I also miss being more involved in day-to-day casework as opposed to being a manager, and was ready to just be someone who was in the courtroom more.
Are you in the courtroom now?
Yes, I am. Yeah, I have, as the supervisor of the domestic violence in Multnomah unit in Multnomah County, I certainly have to try cases and have my own caseload. I also handle murder cases, and in July, I finished the prosecution of State Renique Jackson. That was in that case, it happened at the High Dive Bar at about 12th and Hawthorne. It was a case in which a man was charged with murder and bias crime. The victim had kind of stood up for his transgender friend and ended up getting stabbed to death. And that was, not to go too far off on a tangent, but that was a case that was a real welcome back to Portland experience. It was a case where a lot of my witnesses worked in the service industry. They worked odd hours. I found myself hopping on my bike at night to go contact someone when they were getting off work and interview a witness, things like that, and just felt like I was really connected to the community I lived in when I prosecuted that case, and was proud to do it, and it was one of the more meaningful cases I've worked on.
So can you tell us why you're running and what's your special sauce?
Yeah. I would say why I'm running and why I hope to get your endorsement are sort of intertwined. Really, I care deeply about process and how the Multnomah County Courthouse is run. I've always wanted to be a judge. That's a big part of it. But I've always loved the courthouse community. Truly, it's just I think a unique, high-energy place that I really missed when I was in Columbia County. It's a situation where you find yourself just having opportunities to make small talk with defense attorneys. You're sort of in the trenches. Everyone is working harder than they ought to have to, probably. And I've really been appreciated the connections I've made with clerks and jail deputies and bailiffs and judges and defense attorneys too. I really feel like Ms. Phillips and I were sort of in the trenches together for a while there, and had some. And those are, I'm pretty nostalgic for that time. I'm hoping that if I am elected, one of the reasons why I hope to have your endorsement is I believe I'm someone who could tackle the backlog of cases on day one and agree that has a big impact on the public defender crisis. And I think a lot of folks agree with that. I'm proud to have the endorsement of several judges and defense attorneys and prosecutors.
And this is conversational, right? May I ask?
Yeah.
So, to that of wanting to close cases. So when you were at, and we have known each other a long time. We've tried cases against each other back when I was at the public defender's office. But when you were in Columbia County, as the head DA, you could make policy, right, on offers for Measure 11s and how to settle cases, right?
Yeah.
But when you were there, Columbia County had the slowest case resolution and the slowest dockets for the entire state of Oregon. So what's going to be different if you're a judge when DAs, quite frankly, have way more power to settle cases, especially Measure 11s?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for the question. So when I was in Columbia County, the person who really set the culture was Ted Grove. He was presiding judge for a long period of time out there.
But you were the head DA, right?
And if I may finish,
Sure, sorry.
Proud to have Judge Grove's endorsement. There's a lot we agree on. One thing I think that I do disagree on, he was someone who was very permissive when it came to continuances. He had the belief that if a defense attorney needed more time, we had to, for due process purposes, give them the benefit of the doubt and grant the set-over. And I was, certainly there were set-overs that I asked for, and I was, I think that's very true. As a judge, I think as a prosecutor who has credibility within the DA's office, I'm someone who's endorsed by DA-elect Vasquez and DA Schmidt. I am someone who can go to the DA's office and say, hey, is the juice worth the squeeze here? Do we really need to be prosecuting that case? I think that can make an impact. I was also looking at the model rules for continuances that were put forth by the American Bar Association. And I was struck by what the list of insufficient grounds for a continuance that the ABA has created. Those insufficient grounds, according to the ABA, are used as a basis to set over cases every day in Multnomah County. A lot of those are, that's absolutely, they have to do with prosecutor requests, officers being on vacation, discovery being provided late, things like that. That is, and I think I'm someone who has the insight into how DA's offices work that can help hold people accountable.
I guess since this is a conversation, I mean, I have so many emails about our consortiums and public defense attorneys scheduling the case resolution days with you, Mr. Auxier, where we were going to work through a backlog and you just didn't appear. We were there on Fridays, we set away that time to resolve cases and you were MIA. So I guess I'm a bit confused at this presentation today because that hasn't been my history, and I know that no Columbia County defense attorney has endorsed Mr. Auxier, and we worked closely with him for a number of years.
I'd like to respond to that.
Yeah, I'm someone that believes strongly that cases will get resolved appropriately if we're in the same room together. One of the things that I remember from back when Ms. Phillips and I were practicing in the Multnomah County Courthouse was we would have these court appearances where the defense attorneys and the prosecutors were in the jury room together, facing each other. And then everyone was sort of ordered or informally ordered to be actually in the jury room face to face discussing their cases and case resolutions. And then they had to leave the jury room and go into the courtroom and report on the status of their case directly to the judge. That's something has gone away post-pandemic. I would love to see a return to that. Virtual appearances are super helpful, practical.
But if I could cut you short, your opponent has basically said you didn't show up for these meetings in Columbia County. So is that true or is that not true?
That's not my recollection. And I remember we did have some discussions about creating sort of virtual case resolution processes. I thought that was a good idea and worth a try, and it didn't really work out. But I don't think that had anything to do with me.
So
I can
Ms.
follow up
Phillips,
with emails.
I just has also said that the docket in Columbia County is the slowest in the state. So two of your opponents are making fairly specific accusations about your conduct as district attorney. And I feel like you need to address them directly.
I think that I remember talking to Judge Grove once, and he was talking about a justice of the Supreme Court sort of addressing historic delays in the Columbia County Courthouse. The time to disposition rate that you saw in Columbia County, that was something that existed for decades before I took office. That was something that I really tried to change. And during the time that I was in office, you did see an increase in the amount of cases going to trial each year that I believe is pretty substantial. So I do kind of disagree with that characterization. That was not how I experienced it.
I practiced with Jeff out there as well. And what I'll say is you went out there 2018 or 17? 2017. I went out there in late 2018. The first year or two I was there, cases were getting resolved. It was perfectly easy to do so. But then there was some hiring done, and it felt like, Jeff, that you checked out, like that you let the day-to-day running of offers and things like that fall to subordinates, and that backlog happened more because of, at least in recent times, because of that. Because when I first started there, yes, I agree that the numbers of cases going to trial increased, but I think it had to do with hiring certain
Did you acknowledge
attorneys.
that when you left for Multnomah County that Columbia County was left in a bit of a mess?
No, I don't acknowledge that. I had a transition plan, and it was there was a DA in my office who's now the elected DA there, or the appointed DA. He hasn't No, he had stood for election. We had a plan in place, and the governor appointed the person that I was supported as my successor from day one.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and the resolutions that we made on cases, I was in the room for all of those discussions, and I stand by those decisions. I feel like those were the right decisions on those cases.
So just a question for each of you. Please just handle it as quickly as you can because we don't have a lot of time. So 4 of you are advocates for people who have been accused of crimes. 1 of you is a prosecutor, but you're all advocates in different ways, and we want judges who are referees and who are impartial and who are going to see things fairly. So give me an example, each of you, please. Actually, we'll start down at this end of the table with Jeff this time, since you had to go first last time. Give us an example of how you would prove to us that you can be impartial, or that you can see things from both sides, not just from, in your case, the prosecutorial side.
Yeah, I do think over my career as a prosecutor, you start to realize that there's certainly not good people, bad people, that there's a lot of ambiguity in every case. One thing that I often talk about is that after doing domestic violence work for almost 20 years, you start to realize that there are survivors of abuse on both sides of the aisle. An example that I would point to is the survivor-centered diversion program that I've been working to implement over my last year in Multnomah County. What we realized in that case is that with the assistance of the Association of Prosecuting Attorneys, is that women of color in particular are arrested for domestic violence at a disproportional rate. And when you look sort of beyond the case facts of that initial police report, you'll see that almost without exception, I would say 9 times out of 10, that woman who was arrested for domestic violence was actually a survivor of abuse. And there's documentation from past cases to support that. So our program we partnered with Bradley Engelhouse and to create a system where advocates reach into the jail when people in that situation are arrested. We inform them we're going to dismiss the case, and we connect that person directly with community-based services. And now we're tracking outcomes on that too. We're partnered with the HBCU on the East Coast, Bowie State, and we're going to see if we make better outcomes than what was happening before. What was happening before is that a lot of these women who were wrongfully arrested were going on probation, getting probation violations, and none of that necessarily needed to happen. I don't believe that needed to happen to protect the community. That's been sort of an eye-opening experience for me, and that's just one example.
Okay, Jen?
To distinguish myself from the other, the 3 that are doing full-time public defense, I'm a private practice. I do some public defense. I also represent crime victims, and I am also an animal law hearings officer for Multnomah County. I have been since 2022. And the difference is...
Can you tell us quickly what that means?
An animal law hearings officer. We handle the cases through the county where, say, the county shelter is going to take a dog away from someone and they appeal it. That's who they appeal to.
The dog owner appeals it.
The dog owner appeals it, yes.
And they appear before you.
Yes, and it's a whole hearing.
The dog
yes.
not lives or dies, but whether they
not lives or dies, no, yes. Although there have been some cases, I haven't had those appear before me, but I've had others where it has been, that kind of a case where it's has the dog, there are allegations of neglect, or they can't care for them, or dogs on the loose, that kind of thing.
And where does one appeal your decision on that?
There is a whole process that you get from the animal shelter. They have to pay a fee. A lot of times they will waive the fee if someone doesn't have enough means. And I applied for it when they were seeking to get a more diverse group of individuals for the hearings officers. because of the underserved community that winds up in
I
front
didn't
of those
mean to
hearings.
slow you
Oh,
down.
that's okay. So, so I represent crime victims, and I think that's important because a lot of times attorneys for crime victims can help resolve cases faster. Because ethically, district attorneys cannot give legal advice to crime victims, and they don't represent crime victims, they represent the people, right, of the county. And I actually have permission from a client to talk about this, where I represented the spouse of someone who was murdered. And in the meetings with the DAs, what the DAs were telling the entire family, not just my client who was the widow, was not always, wasn't always 100% accurate. It was I think in an attempt to make people feel better, and through and these are very, very difficult cases. And a lot of times, especially someone who has practice in criminal defense, and especially with murder cases, these are really difficult emotional cases. And it's a lot of times of what's the number you can agree on, as opposed to a life sentence, right? And it's sitting with people, it's understanding their emotions, it's understanding their grief, and it's also knowing enough to reach out to both the prosecutor and the defense attorney and say, for example, I could tell the defense attorney in a case, you don't have to tell me anything, but if you want to listen, I can tell you what's being said in the conversation with the family, because it's not privileged, and this is what the prosecutor is saying they want to settle the case at. This is where the family's number is at. This is where my client's number is at. And having victim representation can help close cases faster, because a lot of times what the victim wants is not necessarily what the prosecutor wants.
Great, thanks, Jen.
Yes, so I'm the only candidate with both prosecutorial and defense experience, so I have looked at it from both sides of the aisle. As a prosecutor, I had the opportunity to make judging decisions, look at the charges that were coming in, and really learn the infrastructure that goes involved in bringing about a case. So with that understanding, I'm able to be a better defense attorney because I can explain exactly how things happened. A lot of things there's a lot of misconceptions about what defense attorneys do. We are the ones with clients, we are the ones interacting with public, and how you get to be an effective defense attorney is to really explain things to your clients who may be in a time of crisis. They may be under the effects of drugs or mental health, and being able to not only share with them what the law states, but also evoke in them a sense of empathy of what an alleged victim or a victim may have experienced is how you become an effective defense attorney. So when it comes to being fair or reasonable, I can simply draw upon my experiences as well as my reasonableness. I have a deep understanding of this county. People are my passion. And having those tough conversations is a central component of my job. I have absolutely no issues with, handing out a sentence when I'm a pro tem judge or explaining the issues with my clients' cases. So it's something that comes naturally, and I can do without a second thought.
Oh,
Thank you. Well, let's see. I am not only a defense attorney, I am a crime victim. So even beyond representing crime victims, I have maybe a more innate knowledge of what that means and how that feels for that person who's there in court.
Do you want to talk about it?
I can. I've mentioned it before. I was raped when I was 13, and it definitely affects how I look at cases. It affects how I talk to clients and represent clients. Not that it's kind of hard to quantify, but if you look at my trial history, I win most of my cases, and I have very few DV cases. And I like to think that in large part that's because I'm able to talk to my client and help them understand the point of view of the alleged victim and help them come to the point of accepting some level of responsibility and resolve cases that way. I guess I'm just going to leave it at that.
All right, thanks.
Tom?
So I don't know if I'll be able to convince you because you'll just have to take my word for it. But I'm a public defender. It's the only job I've really had as an adult, or at least a job as a lawyer. My dad was a public defender my entire childhood.
I'm married to a prosecutor.
But I am married to a prosecutor. My wife's a cop. Just kidding. She's a prosecutor.
In Multnomah County?
In Washington County. So she's okay. So I do have that perspective. But personally, I'm not. I think people who commit crime should be punished. I echo what the other defense attorneys have shared, that I don't think you're a good defense attorney unless you understand the perspective of the prosecution, both the victim and the prosecutor, him or herself, and both for negotiation and for preparing for anticipating trial. But I think it'd be very hard for me to send someone to prison. Probably anybody. Certainly, it would be really hard for me to send somebody to prison for a property crime. But I will tell you, if I think the law requires me to do it, I would do it. But it would be challenging.
There's a perception in the press and maybe in parts of the bar that the judges in Multnomah County are slow and don't work very hard. Some of them. To be blunt, I'm curious if that's inaccurate. Is that accurate? And if so, how would you change it?
So the judges that I appear in front of, you're asking me if the judges I appear in front of every day are lazy, who exercise tremendous power over all my clients are lazy?
I think that there might be an ethical issue with answering
Let me rephrase the question. What could you do as one of many to make the administration of law more efficient and more fair?
Well, I think being available for trial, to be assigned trials by the presiding judge, and be assigned all sorts of hearings, the presiding judge, I think. Encouraging written filings, which are frankly pretty rare in Multnomah County, and reading and deciding on those written findings and being prepared for hearings.
Why would encouraging written findings be better than written?
Because you can read at night, and you can't have court at night. Well, I guess you could, but you don't have court at night. So I think those are two things you can, the court could do, a judge could do to help things move more efficiently. I think there are some very hardworking judges in Multnomah County. I think Judge Waller's incredibly hardworking.
Got a case in front of her right now.
No.
All right, well, let's leave some of this answer because I'm sure we'll hear some overlap.
Well, I haven't practiced a whole lot in Multnomah County since 2018. And COVID hit between then, and so I don't see a lot of maybe what the current issues might be or be perceived to be. But my recollection is that new judges tend to get thrown on the arraignment docket, and they're not immediately in there, pushing the buttons and making the things change. Getting assigned to trial docket is going to be up to presiding, right? So there's some things that you might be able to do, but some things that are going to be out of your control. Okay. Learning the ropes, I guess, so that the judge feels comfortable sending you to trial docket, or maybe having civil law experience so the judge feels comfortable sending you right to the trial docket because you've handled motions for summary judgment before, those sort of things.
Okay.
Yeah, so I have never had a legal job that wasn't a high caseload. I am just used to high volume and being able to move from one matter to the next. I don't know quite how, but I am gifted with that kind of a brain where I can delve into one subject and then go to the next quite easily and effectively. So I thank my lucky stars for that. We are somewhat powerless, and I do notice new judges in the arraignment dockets on the JC4. Community court also is where you can expect to be sent. But in terms of efficiency and administration of justice, I gotta say, I at least once a month have Multnomah County practitioners call me upset about just being laid into by judges in Multnomah County, especially the public defense providers. And I think that we need to have some tough conversations and accountability in how we're treating public defense providers in Multnomah County. There's a reason why a lot of people don't want to practice there. There's a reason why it's the epicenter of the crisis. We're talking about administration and really working. We need to talk about...
So you're suggesting the problem is not just that there aren't enough public defenders, that judges are abusing them?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
By how? What? In what?
There are public defenders that have been threatened to be held in contempt when they explain that they need a set-over, when they are the fifth attorney new on a case where the individual has been in custody without an attorney. That's happened to multiple people that have taken cases off the unrepresented list. They have been just completely dressed down and berated in court when they have overextended themselves and don't have enough resources. And that's something that no one wants to talk about, but it's something that we need to. I've had people call me crying, people asking me, is this normal? Has this happened to you?
Who's the judge that's most abusive towards public defenders?
We can't say that.
Well, you could, but you choose not to.
I have to adhere to ethical rules, unfortunately, but outside in the parking lot off the record, I'm happy to.
All right.
Obviously, I would only be able to control what's in my courtroom, but I want to go back to what Mr. Dwyer said about motion filings, because that's a really good point. And written motion filings can really help settle cases. As defense attorneys, having a robust motion practice is really helpful, not just for trial work, but for settling cases. And being a judge that asks both parties to file written, on murder cases, both sides file written responses. And on most Measure 11s, both sides file written responses. But not always. And the drug call, to go back to what Mr. Oxier was saying, the drug call that he was talking about, those were drug cases and property crime cases. They weren't Measure 11s, so it was a lot easier for us to settle them without any extra help. Measure 11s are a little bit different. But asking for a full motion practice, because then you can sit down and have conversations with the attorneys and say, you might win this at trial to a prosecutor, but you're going to lose it on appeal. And getting people to see the value in, do you want to potentially create bad law for the state? Do you want to put the victim through a second trial 3 to 4 years later? Because that's what happens when cases get reversed. That's one of the things about representing victims is sometimes settlement isn't necessarily, the criminal justice system isn't ever going to make them completely whole again, especially in a murder case, right? It's just not. But it can at least give them some sort of closure and the ability to move on. And when cases close with a plea, they don't have to worry about it getting reversed by the Court of Appeals and then a retrial or by the Supreme Court several years later. And so written filings are great. Trials, having everybody be ready, dismissing cases when the witnesses aren't there. All of those things, but also just encouraging more. I do like the collegiality and people working together too, but just trying to run a tighter ship.
Can I comment real quick?
Quickly.
So I agree about the drug call thing, but the written practice is great. Is great when you have a manageable caseload as a public defender, but it's frequently not. But if we can fix the caseload crisis, maybe. But I believe everything that Rachel just said about and Tom about written motions being able to help resolve cases.
And that's why people burn out, quite frankly, because I worked under Ryan Scott when I was at Metropolitan Public Defender. He's an incredibly well-respected trial attorney and appellate attorney here in Oregon, and he encouraged and sort of demanded that we all have a good motion practice. And you can do it, but then you have no life,
Gotcha.
And that's why people burn out and leave.
It's a life. I have a life.
Well, one thing I wanted to say, and I mean this very sincerely, that I know that every one of the 5 people in this room would be a very hardworking judge. I can tell you that after I announced my candidacy, I was really humbled by a number of judges who reached out to express their support, and they did say, that's what we need. We need people who will work hard. And there was an implication that some of the judges just don't necessarily have the criminal law experience to take on a huge caseload right out the gate as a judge and take on the bigger cases. There probably should be some accountability there. One thing, and I said this jokingly, but I've said semi-sincerely that maybe the alignment week should do a good, bad, and ugly for judges.
Who thought about it?
That's actually,
All right.
actually a really good idea.
Pop quiz. So, as a journalist, which we are, you aren't, one of the most important decisions written in Oregon was by a Supreme Court judge about 2 or 3 decades ago, which basically interpreted that the First Amendment in the Oregon Constitution offers broader protections than the First Amendment in the United States Constitution. Who's the author of that?
Is that Landau?
Nope. Nobody knows.
I know which decision. It has to deal with nudity.
Yeah, had to do with strip clubs. Hans Lindy.
Oh.
Okay.
Of course
You guys
it's
all
like that.
failed. Next
Can I
question.
get like half a point?
Lucas,
Well, at least you know that none of you got disqualified for that.
No, I mean,
I think the pop quiz was good enough for me.
Okay. All right, we need to know what you were all best known for in high school. Let's see, why don't we start with you, Jen, since you're in the middle.
I was a huge band geek, and I
I'm
was
sorry, band geek?
band geek.
What did you
Meaning
play?
you played the clarinet or you went to punk shows?
Both. I played trombone and concert band and jazz band, and then I was in ska and punk bands as my extracurriculars.
You were in a ska and a punk band? Do you
Yep.
remember the name of the bands?
Of course I do.
Are you willing to tell us?
Can this be a parking lot conversation? One was called Irix Out, and then there was a guy named Iric that we kicked out. And then there was a band called Back for More. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Rachel?
Oh, John.
Best known for in high school. I was in different high schools. I don't know. I could burp the alphabet. I'm not sure.
You could burp,
could burp
the alphabet?
alphabet?
That would go down, yeah. Not many people who could do that.
I knew some folks who could do that.
Huh?
I knew some people who could do that in Florida.
Okay.
All right, in Florida, of course. Tom, what were you best known for in high school?
Not to make you guys uncomfortable, I was a second team all-conference Metro Catholic football conference defensive tackle.
Wow.
So
For what high school?
I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri. I went to St. John Vianney High School, which is a Catholic school in St. Louis.
And you were a defensive,
I was a lot bigger defensive tackle.
you were a defensive tackle.
How big were you?
Bigger. like
Huge.
60 pounds bigger.
Wow.
So defensive tackle's a lineman, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
You know,
Okay.
a lot of 1-2.
yeah, okay.
You know, 5'11". 5'10".
I mean, I'm familiar with the position Florida again.
Rachel, what were you best known for? You were an actress.
Yeah, I
You don't
actually.
need me to tell you that.
I don't need you. Actually, probably the 2 most unique, or 3, I guess. Well, I was varsity soccer, and I
What high
played.
school?
I was at Ben Franklin and then at McMain High School, because the arts high school, NOCA, you had to go to one school half the day, and then you would go to NOCA the other half. Now it's all one big school,
Gotcha.
which is great. But the most unique was I could walk tightrope, ride a unicycle, and juggle.
Well, it's not at the same time.
Not at the same. No, I had a friend that could ride the unicycle and juggle,
Okay.
but not me.
Jeff?
I grew up in Sherwood and went to Sherwood High School and had this sort of feeling throughout high school that Portland was the place to be. Like, I was missing out not being there, and I was someone who spent my weekends going to La Luna, seeing all ages shows there, and going to Everyday Music on Burnside. That was me and my friends were
Want
down
to be
for that.
city kid, want to be Portland.
Exactly. Total wannabe.
Okay. All right, well, thank you all for coming in. This has been really helpful.
Really appreciate you coming in. Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys.
Good luck to you all.
Thank you.